Good morning. Greg with Butter Suspension. Today I'm going to rebuild a RockShox Super Deluxe coil. And the camera's going to be moving around a bunch. I'm going to try and get wide shots, detail shots, but you know, it's just me here this morning, so let's party. Beep. Okay. Pardon my mess, it's a busy week. So I've already recorded the settings. I've already removed the coil. And I'm just going to show you some tools you need real quick. There's an IFP depth height gauge. You don't need this fancy one, but it sure does make life easier. And then there's a separate IFP oil setting tool for these. This has an internal spring. It's called countermeasure, and you need a tool to take care of the countermeasure spring. So this slides so you can put pressure on it. Shredder core tool, and then a 4-pin tool to get this seal head off. And then you're going to need 7-weight oil, slick honey, and a bunch of rags. All right, let's get started. One thing I do on these, and they say this in the instructions too, so when you go to put it back together, this tool has to sit on top of this tool, and then you have to be able to get into that hole to torque it down to the torque wrench. And so you can't have the tool cover up the square hole. So you also need to be able to set the IFP height without having this tool in the way. See if you can see that. So if I'm going to set the IFP height with this tool or this tool, I can't have this thing in the way. So I know that this seal head is tight from the factory. So this is where it's going to finish when I'm done rebuilding the shock. So what I'm going to do is select a position on here that makes it so that I have access to the IFP, the piggyback. And so basically the wrench is going to be 90 degrees from that. And so what I do is I pre-mark just barely, just a little tiny mark. You can use a Sharpie, but I just use a little pick, and I put a little tiny mark right there. It's kind of hard to see, but it just indicates 90 degrees. That way I know that when I go to put this all back together, and you'll see this when I put it all back together, when I go to put the wrench on the seal head and this tool on here, I know that when I'm done tightening this to torque, it's not going to get in the way. Oh, one other wrench we'll need. RockShox 31mm wrench to get the reservoir body off. All right. Oh, and you'll need a vise. You always need a vise. Man, it must be early in the morning. You also need, to pump up the IFP, you need the adapter to fill this. Ooh. Pull the cover off. Get this closer, why not? Whoop. Can't wait till they have mini flying drones for this stuff. Ah, come on. Fine, it's got detents. Okay. Defuse the bomb. You can see how this moved down. That's because that internal spring is trying to pull this apart. The countermeasure spring is there to basically counteract the pressure of the piston in the IFP. And so that's why you need all these tools to preset, pre-squeeze that before you set your oil height. You'll see how that all goes together later. I always like to pull out a Schrader core. Push the cap down. Inside here there's a circlip that has to come out. Be careful not to scratch this on the inside, because that is a sealing surface on the inside of this. Clean out the dirt before you pull it out. I always like to clean as I go. That way when I set a piece down, I know that it's ready to go for reassembly, assuming it's not damaged. Coil looks pretty good. There's a little shmoo in here, but that's to be expected. .31 wrench. I like to break this loose. And you'll see a bunch of dirt come off. I'm going to try and keep all the dirt out of here. It'll be fine. I'm going to clean it anyway, but I just like to get as much of that out of there as possible. So then the body, reservoir body comes off. More oil. see this. So that's the IFP. It's going to come out this direction. It can't come out this direction. So I just shove it. And then I'll use something non-sharp, non-scratching to shove that out, like the plastic handle of something, if it fits. You kind of got to get a little English left and right. IFP is directional, and there's a bleed screw right here, and then an O-ring. Pull the O-ring off. This is a T10. Clean this, set it aside. Like I was saying, the oil's pretty good. That's not too bad. Inside this, there's an O-ring and a kind of a metal, it's not really a washer, it's like a round piece that's designed to kind of give the O-ring something to sit against. In the seal kit is everything you need to rebuild this as far as wear parts, but this O-ring is not included. So you really want to be careful to not bugger this one up. Also, I'm being very careful to pull the O-ring out, but not scratch any of these sealing surfaces. So you want to save this O-ring because it does not come in the kit. And there's this metal ring in here. Set those aside. Super Deluxe, both coil and air, these are really some of my favorite shocks. They are not flashy or fancy. They really do get the job done, but to me the biggest thing, you know, I have never seen a Super Deluxe blown up. I'm sure it has happened, but I've rebuilt hundreds of these. I've never seen one blow up. The only time I've seen damage on these is if you let the service intervals go way too long. You can start to wear out this shaft, but those are replaceable now. They didn't used to be. And then the other thing I've seen is the inside of this IFP. If you let it go too long, this IFP, the internal floating piston, can wear on the inside of this. And once this is worn, it doesn't really do its job anymore. It doesn't separate the oil and the air. So you gotta swap them out. Why did my computer just turn off? That's not cool. So this is the countermeasure spring. You can see it's a pretty stiff spring, but it's designed to counteract the forces that the IFP puts on it. Because when you inflate the IFP, it's at 250 psi. So it's pushing, this has to resist that. So this kind of is an alternative. It's a way to push on it. Hold on one, please. I don't know why my computer just shut down. Okay. $12 millimeter. So I will take off the nut. Always look for a little washer. And then I'll just slide, I'll put this Allen wrench right here, just slide everything off onto that. the instructions will tell you to take this off, rebuild the shock, put it back on. But I always take this all the way down and lay everything out, clean everything up, because dirt and old oil can sit in there. Seal head, bottom out bumper. Put that bottom out bumper right back on. This nut is held on both with torque and Loctite, so you always want to make sure there's no Loctite there when you rebuild these. This spring is held into this eyelet with these little set screws. Sometimes when I go to take these apart, the spring has come loose because one of these has come loose. So you always want to check and make sure that that is tight. Not crazy tight, it's a little guy. Just needs to hold the spring in place. Again, I am using a pick, but I'm being very careful. All of my load is going away from the sealing surface. For this seal, I use a little flat blade screwdriver because it's pretty dull. You can see this is actually pretty clean. Very little dirt in there, which is good. So that's the wiper. And then down inside there's an O-ring. That's the main seal. So I'll stab that, punch it through. Sorry, more technical difficulties. There we go. Lots of Q-tips. Clean, clean, clean. Oh. Oh man, that cleaner. It lets you know where you have a cut. Again, this is really super clean. Usually there's a lot more dirt in here. But more than anything, that's just the benefit of preventative maintenance rather than reparative. Stuff lasts a lot longer if you stay on top of the service intervals. As with the damper shaft, the nut will have Loctite in it too, so I want to make sure and clean all that out. Loctite only works on clean surfaces. So on this one, this is a, where did it go? Select Plus. So this one just has rebound and a 3-position climb switch. On this one, the compression assembly doesn't really want to just flop out. On the Ultimates, because you have a low speed adjuster, the way that that one is a little different, this whole assembly, like you'll take this IFP body off and the assembly will fall out, so you got to be careful. But this one, you can see it stays put. It's not going anywhere. So I really want to make sure that this is clean all the way around. Soak up as much of the old oil as possible. You also want to make sure that when you put this back together, the selector, you can see I'm putting a 2mm Allen in here. And I'm putting pressure. I just want to make sure that it's open. Because if you go to rebuild this and you try and bleed it with it closed, oil won't flow in one direction. So make sure that it clicks down. Set that one aside. Pretty simple seal kit. Here's your IFP stuff. Here's your main seal head stuff. And it comes with bushings. This is a trunnion, so it only needs one bushing. But that's why these also only ever get full rebuilds, because there's no air can to deal with, which is really nice. Don't get me wrong, I love RockShox, but these are simpler. So I'll preload the gland for the O-ring with grease. Put this one in first, because if you're trying to put this into the second spot, it wants to go where this one lives. It's just really difficult. So I will load this one first. It's a really stiff wiper seal. So you really got to mean it. And you'll notice I'm using my hands, not tools. I don't want to scratch or damage anything. And then I'll just kind of convince it to go where it needs to go. And now I can fold this one. And I'll use this tool. Again, it's dull. There's no sharp bits here. And I'll pop it into its little gland and then just work it around. And then I'll take a little more grease. Make sure that O-ring is greasy. Set that one aside. For the IFP reservoir, take that metal ring. It wants to pop down past the threads. It sits down in there. Clean up the O-ring that we have to reuse. Grease it. And you want to make sure that that's in the gland all the way around. Like I'll physically feel it and I'll visually inspect it because, like I said, it doesn't come with a seal kit. I could go find one, but I'd rather not. So I will thread this on. I'll start to feel the O-ring engage and I'll kind of back it off a little bit just to make sure that it sits up where I want it to. Get it hand tight. And then the wrench has got a place for a crescent or for a torque wrench. These torque out at 8 Newton meters. .90 degrees to the wrench. Boom. So the IFP side comes with an O-ring for your IFP, an O-ring for your IFP cap. There's a new bleed screw and O-ring. And then it comes with another O-ring. This is if for some reason you take the reservoir body off of the main eyelet, there's an O-ring between these two. And that's what this O-ring is for. We don't need to replace it. It's not like it's a moving part, but if it ever gets damaged or if you lose it, if you decide to take this apart, or if you buy like another shock, like an Ultimate, and you take all the Ultimate guts and swap it out, then you'll want to use a new O-ring. So I always lay this stuff out in the order that it comes off. And then you really got to pay attention to the two sides of this piston. This one has a smaller inner diameter, if you will. This one has a bigger inner diameter, and the shims that touch this piston match that diameter. So technically you could take these shims off, flip the piston over, put it back together. The shims would be in the right order, but the piston would be flipped and it wouldn't be doing its job. It wouldn't block oil flow in the correct direction. So it's really important to pay attention to how that goes. The other way to think of it is this is all going onto this shaft. So if you didn't take this off and clean it, you just put it back on the way it is. But because I really like to take these apart and clean everything up, make sure there's no damage or little bits of metal or plastic or rubber, you just need to find a way that works for you to take these off. So I'll take it off. See if we can see this, make sure. Okay, cool. Beep. And RockShox just recently published all this shim stack information for the Deluxe and the Super Deluxe. So if you do drop it or get it mixed up, you can go onto the SRAM page and look it all up. So I just wipe these off, make sure and get all the crud, old oil. Make sure they're looking like they're in good shape. Looking for damage. It seems to be pretty rare for these to have damaged shims compared to some of the lighter weight shocks, which get abused the same but are just not as strong. You also want to check this piston for wear. This little glide ring. Again, it's pretty rare, but every once in a while these will poop off. The downside is that this is not a replacement part, so you'll have to find a new piston. So if you ever see a stack like this, these are what's called ring shims. This one and this outer ring shim are all the same outer diameter. This inner shim is thinner than this shim. So what happens is when you sandwich these together, you get kind of a squeezed sandwich. It kind of preloads these two, makes them effectively stiffer. It's just another way to control how much everything moves, because all shims do is get out of the way. Like they resist one direction and they get out of the way the other direction to allow oil to pass by. So it's just another way of, like if you were to replace this ring shim with just another one of these, it's a thinner material than this combined, so it technically makes it a little bit lighter of a tune. I'm not a mechanical engineer, but if I understand it correctly, that's what's going on. And it's really important when you put a ring shim back together. Let's see if I can get this. Focus. Oh, come on. Not very good focus. But it's really important that this is centered around the outside of that inner shim. If this sits off center, it won't do its job and it messes with the oil flow. And then worst case, you can have it sit way, way off center, and then that's going to just cause a bunch of damage. So it's really important. That's also why I don't take the Allen wrench and just put everything back, because the shims can move. So. Another ring shim. A little bit of red Loctite. Doesn't take a lot. And this torques out to 6.8 Newton meters with a 12 millimeter. Always rewind your wrenches. I like to wipe off whatever little extra red Loctite. It's not really a big deal. Loctite doesn't really do much unless it's under pressure. So now this is the part where we got to set this. Turn this up here. Got to set the countermeasure. So first I find my little mark which is right here. That's where I'm going to set the wrench. This has to get out of the way because you're spreading these apart. And then I need to make sure that this, again, is out of the way. This also can't be down here because it would run into the shock. So it has to go like this. And what I'm going to do is grab my wrench. You have to squeeze this until it's basically completely compressed. Just pretend like you're the Hulk. Tighten this down. Not crazy, but now you can see that spring is compressed. So this is ready to go. One more time, make sure that valve is open. You want a garbage can because this gets messy. Load up the main body with a bunch of oil. You'll see it start to come out here. I guess I should get the camera up. Come on. So load the body. Oil will start to come from here and work its way over here. But I will also put oil over here. I'm not going to fill this yet, because right now what I'm going to do is take a rubber glove and I'm basically going to cover one side. Hopefully this doesn't flop over. So now I've made a little diaphragm and I'm going to push oil from one side to the other. And I'm just looking for bubbles, because even filling this with oil, bubbles will be inside this area. And then I will do the other direction. You'll see little bubbles. And you just do this until the bubbles stop. It's really important to not push a bunch of oil and then have air on one side. Because that's the whole point, is to not have air in the system. So you want to balance it back and forth, back and forth. You can also give it a ting-ting. This is plastic. Okay. So I have my depth gauge set to like 22 millimeters. And this has got a stopper built in. It's just designed to push the piston to a certain point. I'm going to push it just into the oil and then make sure that there's no bubbles caught here. And then I'm going to set the seal head and just make sure that I'm pushing through oil. You'll see what I mean here in a second. The bleed screw is out. It has to be out for this part. Be careful when you're pushing this in, because it will get oil everywhere. How does that look? Cool. So mine actually has a piece of cloth inside, because otherwise it wants to shoot oil everywhere. You just go real slow. See if you can see this. See, the oil level is above the IFP. And then I'll take it out. I'll give it a little tap and a bunch of angle. So I want any bubbles that are caught in the side to work their way out. There's one. drop the bleed screw in there. There's going to be a couple bubbles that come off of it. I just want to make sure, again, just trying to do everything you can to get bubbles to be out of the equation. And it's magnetic, so I can flip it. This is a little screw that's going into plastic, so it doesn't have to be crazy tight. The idea is you turn it until the IFP spins. This is not our set IFP height yet. Fill this with oil to the top of the threads, but not the top of the body. Okay, this is where it gets messy. There's just going to be oil everywhere. Hang that up a little bit. And you want to do this at a bit of an angle to kind of soak the piston, if you will. And you just go slow. This also allows bubbles to kind of work their way through the piston. You can see the bubbles coming there maybe a little bit. I wish it would focus better. Why is it not focusing on that? So also, as you're doing this, the IFP will want to come out. That's why they have you shove it in about 20 millimeters. So what I will do, I'm going to put this down, is just give it a little pressure. Again, more oil. I'm just keeping pressure where I want it. So that way it doesn't push the piston out, the IFP. Since the IFP is staying put, it forces the oil up and out. And you just want to go slow. There's actually a slot cut in the threads for the seal head that's designed to let oil come out and bubbles. You'll start to engage the O-ring. Then it gets really hard, so you really got to push. At this point, the O-ring is going to win, so I just give up on pushing on the IFP because we're going to reset it anyway. Now you notice it gets tight right where I put the mark. These go to, I think it's 250 inch-pounds or 28.2 Newton meters. Yep. And again, 90 degrees to the wrench. Good. So now we're going to set the IFP, but you got to leave this whole apparatus in place because we've still preloaded that internal countermeasure. The IFP needs to be set when the countermeasure is compressed. Take out the bleed screw. I like to do another twist and tap. I'm just looking for extra bubbles that maybe came out somehow. There's a big one. If you poke down, it allows the bubble to work its way out. Oh, another one. Come on, buddy. No reason to be in a hurry. It's better to get everything out. Okay. So the RockShox bleed check tool has two measurements, 33 and 39. 39 is only for like the downhill length shock, which is the really big one. So everything else is 33. And you want to take something that basically fills this hole. This is like a 2.5, I think. And this is your stopper. So what I'm going to do, again, this is more oil and it's going to make a mess. That's why you do everything over a garbage can. So right now you can see it sits. I'm going to slowly push this. I'm pushing the IFP down, which then displaces oil. You can see more of a mess. Blur it. But then I get to the point where the Allen wrench is, and it stops. So that's the depth. Take this out. Do not push on it anymore. Pull that out. Make sure, it shouldn't change, but make sure that the oil level is above the IFP, because you want to put the bleed screw back in. Drop that down in there. Come on, buddy. Pardon my terrible videography skills. I am no Jose. Okay. Drain out the extra oil. And then the tool for setting the depth is also your bubble gauge tester. So it has this little line right here. So you basically, you push the thing in and then you'll see that little white rectangle. You have that much room for it to move, for it to be a good bleed. If you have like tons of bubbles, it would just do this because you're just compressing bubbles. But if there's no bubbles, you push on it and nothing happens. So let's see what we got. So you can see this little rectangle right here. Push, 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 nothing moves. That's good. Cool. You want to get most of the extra oil out. Again, you do not want to remove this setup until you have pressurized this, because the spring in here is fighting against the pressure. So if you put this together, but you've taken this off, it changes where the IFP is. It's probably not going to be an issue because what you do is you just pump it up to 250 and you'll see it. But this is the order of operations, if you will. Reload my Schrader core. Grease. I always like to put this in a direction that faces one way or the other so that I can get the pump on there. Install the circlip, ring clip, whatever you want to call it. Get a little hook, pull that up. You can see I'm fighting the internal pressure because I got the Schrader core in there. There we go. I always like to install this adapter without the pump attached because the O-rings on these are kind of delicate, and I just want to make sure it gets loaded properly and doesn't get squished. This one goes to 250. So when you do this, you'll see this will start to get loose. Like right now I can't move it because this is still, the spring pressure is tighter than the air pressure. But once this gets up to around 250, you'll see that this can just flop off now because there's no pressure on it anymore. The air pressure has pushed the IFP and pushed the oil up against this piston. So when you remove this, you want to remove the adapter. You don't want to take the pump off because then the adapter will have left the valve open and it'll let all the pressure out. Give this one more final gentle check. Reload the little refrigerator cap. Cool. That's it. At this point, I'm gonna have to clean the crap out of it because there's oil everywhere. But I can do a little bench test here. Crank the rebound up. Super slow rebound. That's good. And then turn the compression all the way up. Yeah. Cool. So when I get done cleaning it up, I'll remount the spring, put it on the dyno, go through all the functions, reset all his settings, and then mount it back on the bike. Flip this around. There we go. Oh, covering. Cool. So that was a Super Deluxe coil rebuild. As per usual, I appreciate everybody watching. I really appreciate comments too, questions. I do my best to try and answer questions after the fact, but I'm trying to get as much content out there as possible because content is key. All right, have a good day. See you guys soon.